the very special 10th episode today. And I'm joined by Dean Jones, who's going to start the show by reading one of his poems.
This is a poem called In Pursuit of the Dragonfly. A nymph lay squirming at the side of a pond. In reeds, mud and marsh it built unbreakable bonds. 4 long years it wriggled and squirmed in the earth, whilst shedding its skin with a dozen rebirths. After 12 transformations and for its last magic trick, a dragonfly emerged, wings transparent and quick. For 300 million years this insect has been king, the lord of the air with cellophane wings. It flew through the sky with agility and speed, amorous, voracious and ferocious by breed, hunting and munching anything it could catch, grabbing mosquitoes mid-air with one snatch. This dragonfly was certainly no stranger to fear. The end of this colourful creature starts here. The dragonfly's countdown started on the first day of flight. After years of evolving, it survived just 70 more nights. This dragonfly had far more than end days to fear. The white-chested house martin's hunger was clear. At dusk, dragonfly set off for a feast. Danger glowed brightly from this fiery winged beast. It flew towards water and swooped very low to capture mosquitoes to help it to grow. The dragonfly's body was bright blue and green, and sadly this meant it was easily seen. The hungry house martin spotted dragonfly's glow, and quick as a flash towards lunch it would go. "Oh, dragonfly, I see you. You'd be a nice feast for me. A dragonfly sandwich for afternoon tea. Oh, dragonfly, I see you." The chase was now on. "Ooh, you look delicious, and soon you'll be gone. You cannot catch me, I'm incredibly quick. If you eat my green body, you're sure to be sick. My body is poisonous, you see if I care. I'd be careful, my friend, about biting down there." "I know your game," the house martin said. "You're telling dragonfly lies so you don't end up dead. So I'll take my chances, I must have my lunch. But dragonflies are an intelligent bunch." The house martin flew incredibly fast. How long could this dragonfly's good fortune last? He changed his tactics. "This bird is a curse," and using its wings it went into reverse. It moved side to side, and vertical too, went high in the air, getting lost in the blue. The house martin now dazzled and frazzled and fried, and from getting so close, it had to decide. Shall I continue to follow this beast? It takes me ages to capture this feast. The dragonfly teased him, the house martin kept on, opened his beak, and with a snap, he was gone. The dragonfly's disappearance was strange and absurd, for it wasn't in the belly of the small, hungry bird. Instead, the dragonfly had escaped from its jaws. It hid in the reeds of the pond with applause. From all the pond creatures, and even tadpoles can speak, they cheered, "Well done, Mr. Dragonfly! You escaped to house martin's beak!" The pond skaters skated excitedly too. The frogs, toads and newts bubbly kisses they blew. The pond skaters skated excitedly too. The otters and cygnets and brown water rats, the crayfish and kingfishers and even the cats applauded the dragonfly for escaping the bird. How he escaped is completely absurd, and as the weeks passed he continued to hide, but not from the house martin's jaws, but from old age he died. And the dragonfly continues to dazzle the eye, the colourful great insect king of the sky. Should you see a house martin looking out for a feast, say don't go near the dragonfly, it's a fiery winged beast.
Thank you so much for that. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
And you refer to yourself as well as the Dragonfly Poet.
Yes.
And where did that sort of image or identity with that image come from?
Well, I mean, the poem kind of says a little bit about dragonflies. They're one of the oldest surviving species. I think they sort of date back, they're prehistoric. And so, like, they're probably one of the most resilient creatures that I can think of. And the other thing, if you listen to the first few lines of the poem, they spend 4 years just as like little, I don't know, little larvae or something, and then they turn into this amazing creature and spread their wings and can do everything, and they can fly backwards and forwards and up and down. And
I didn't know they could fly backwards.
Yeah, they can just do anything, and you know, that poem I read was inspired by a photograph of a real house martin. trying to hunt down and catch this dragonfly, and the dragonfly is within sort of millimetres of its beak, but it still manages to escape. And I think for me, being a poet and getting involved in all of this spoken word is something that's happened sort of later in my life, I suppose. I'm, in my early 40s, and it's something. It feels a bit like I've turned into a dragonfly. I'm sort of finally doing stuff that I really enjoy doing, and I can suddenly fly and dart about from side to side and whatever. So yeah, I like the idea of what dragonflies have gone through, and yeah.
So in the way that dragonflies, they take a while to prepare, and then they become this incredible creature that kind of has this fiery body and has this resilience, as you say.
Yeah.
I can see that. No, that's a very nice symbol.
Yeah, and then sadly they only last for I think it's like they last for like 70 days, and then they. And
really, I was going to ask how long they actually.
Yeah, they don't last for very much longer after that.
That's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah. So it takes all that time, and then the pinnacle of their life is so short, but the most significant bit and the bit that they're remembered for, because we don't really remember the larvae.
No, I can't say I've seen dragonfly larvae.
No, there you go.
But definitely seen dragonflies, and obviously they always kind of pack a punch, and they've got this sort of real beauty about them and the strong colours, and I like the narrative as well in that with the animals that are involved and this kind of cunning dragonfly who's outsmarted
and the camaraderie between all of the other creatures in and around the pond or wherever they live.
Yeah.
They've known this amazing creature since it was that kind of tiny, pretty useless larvae, and then turns into this amazing creature.
Yeah, it's sort of like, wow, what's happened to you? And there's something about it as well, which, classic fairy tales that are often for children, they have dark edges to them. And there are moments in that where you're like, oh gosh, has he been eaten? Is he going to get eaten?
Yeah.
And so it's got that about it, those moments of drama. And from what you said, you do write poetry for children, and that would be a poem for children as well.
Yeah, I really enjoy writing poetry for children, poetry that's accessible to children and kind of gets them thinking about how they could write, and and make writing fun as well, because I really enjoy that kind of writing about something that kids will find interesting. I suppose there are loads of sort of children's poets and children's books that have that rhyming pattern and pace and rhythm and everything that for whatever reason is really engaging for kids. So yeah.
No, absolutely. Yeah. And the rhymes in that obviously really stand out, I think, and they're great, and it creates this kind of lyrical sort of flow to the whole thing. So do you think that's essential to children's writing, that children's poetry writing, that you've got those rhymes?
I don't know if it's essential. I think it makes a poem or a passage of writing more engaging. When I remember distinctly when I was younger, I always used to, when I went into the school library, if we had to go into the library, picking out the poems that rhymed, because I just found them easy to read, and I could take in the story that much better, much easier. And I think getting kids into reading at an early age, in whatever way you go about doing that, is really key, so that hopefully that then develops their passion and love for reading and books generally. Absolutely. And I think if you can get kids and anyone into reading, it expands their understanding of the world and their perspective of the world and that sort of stuff. So yeah, getting kids into reading is really, really important, I think.
And you said you've come to poetry fairly late on. So when you were younger, did you find interest in, English and poetry? Yeah. Was it always there?
I think so. Yeah, I mean, I did write poetry when I was younger. Whether or not it was of any good, I just enjoyed doing it, and that's the way I look at it now. If people enjoy listening to it or reading it, that's a bonus for me. I actually enjoy the process of creating and writing. So. Right. And if people get enjoyment out of it, that's awesome.
So a lot of your enjoyment comes from, as you say, actually constructing the pieces and that sort of whole operation of things.
Yeah, and then I guess the pinnacle of that, or the what you do with it once it's written, is just as exciting. So being able to stand up in front of people and then read stuff out and hopefully getting a response and people, it resonating with people in one way or another. Now obviously that poem can resonate to an extent, maybe to a greater extent, I don't know, but if you pick other subject matters which are more suitable for older audiences, or they're about life things that we all experience, then obviously you're tapping into other people's experiences,
Mm.
and that's where I think that's the power of poetry. Those short bursts of experience that you can deliver, that suddenly everyone goes, oh yeah, that's me. That's exactly how I feel about things. That could have been me that you were talking about there. When that happens, you think that's good. Finding
those points of connection with people.
Yeah.
And do you find that people, say to you, oh, that really spoke to me, like I've had sort of similar experiences, or have you been able to
different poems? Yeah, I think different poems do, and different people, it will resonate with different people, because everybody has a different experience. I mean, certainly during the pandemic, I think everybody was experiencing a lot of similar things.
Yeah.
So I've tried to kind of compartmentalise all of the different styles and themes as I've written things over the last couple of years, and I did write a lot of poems about COVID and that feeling of isolation and what it's like to get out and how you get out of your head, if you like, and into the world, sort of thing, and escape a little bit. And I think it was, just for me, it demonstrated not only for the artists and the creators, but also the people that are taking that stuff in, how important it is to have art in our life, in one way or another.
Completely.
Because we were all stuck inside for such a long period of time.
Yeah, and finding ways to sort of express what we feel is vital at those sorts of moments. And it's not something that I suppose everybody would automatically go to if they don't write things or they've never tried something like that. So yeah, I think it's lucky that you've got that to go to.
Yeah.
And on top of that, I found the lockdown, I did make things, and it was quite sort of a creative time. But the inspiration, it was kind of very similar sorts of inspirations all day for the whole duration of lockdown. Yeah. As you're saying, we were all having similar experiences. And you could think that might actually not be conducive to creativity at all, that we wouldn't create anything. What do you think it was about it that actually made you produce stuff?
So there's a combination of different things. I think I felt a degree of responsibility because we haven't talked about it yet, but I was elected Bard of Buckingham in 2019, and it was just before the pandemic started. So it was November, also October, I was elected as Bard, and then obviously we went into lockdown in the March. I'd only had about 5 or 6 months as Bard, under normal circumstances. Yeah. And then suddenly I did feel a huge responsibility to kind of contribute in some way and not make people feel better, but give some people a sort of an outlet in one way or another. Whether I did or not, I don't know, really.
I'm sure you did.
But certainly for me it was an outlet. Yeah. And I think because I felt that responsibility, I was really looking for things to write about. And in those we had an hour's walk, didn't we? Do you remember? we could go outside for an hour and have a walk.
Those precious moments.
Yeah, exactly. So I went out with my dog, and I was looking for things, and not just looking, but really looking, like almost like putting everything under a magnifying glass and going, how can I turn that into something more than it is, or more than perhaps we see it, at first glance. So even I experimented with that quite a lot, and so I even sort of wrote poems about just a single blade of grass, and then really going into the detail of what a blade of grass is. And,
oh wow! Almost meditative.
It is, yeah. I mean, it's a kind of a form of well-being, isn't it? It's that kind of ability to kind of take yourself away from yourself and focus on something else is really good for you, to get out of your head. I think I've said that already, but yeah. Yeah,
and I suppose, as you say, only having that hour to do it. You probably thought, I've got to make this productive. Like, this is it. This is my observation of the outside for the day.
Yeah, it was really nice. And I mean, I could probably write a poem about this, but I remember distinctly those moments, and I'd kind of sit literally by a river, or I'd sit on the bottom of a tree and look at the view in front of me. And throughout the year, you had the different seasons. So each time I could sit in the same place 4 times in the year, and then get a completely different perspective on whatever I was seeing. So you turned it into a whole new poem. Yeah. Which is great.
Yeah, you could do a set of poems on the same place at different moments.
Yeah. So it's for me it was a really good experience, and hopefully, and some of the poems that I wrote, I then sort of shared on social media and various like Facebook and Twitter and whatever, and occasionally it didn't happen with every poem, but occasionally it really did spark an interest, and people would either share it or comment on it, and that's great. It felt then like you were having a conversation or a dialogue with your audience as well, which is nice.
Yeah, which we were all lacking at that time as well, that ability to communicate. So it must be nice to find ways of tapping into that.
Yeah.
Realising that you'd sort of hit the nail on the head.
Yeah, not every time, but sometimes.
Sometimes it happened. Okay, well, shall we have the first song? So which is this? What is this?
I think that you are going to put on... What one are you putting on? You're going to put on The Man Who Sold the World, which is Nirvana Unplugged singing a Bowie song, which is one of my favourite songs. And I've chosen all of these songs because I think the people that wrote them are poets, and they've basically turned a poem into a song. So the words are fantastic and the music's great as well. This reminds me of my youth.
What's next? I didn't screw it up, did I?
Okay, I think we had the live version there, but that was quite nice. That was atmospheric, wasn't it?
Cool tune. This reminds me of my youth.
Oh, does it? Was that the reason for the choice?
Yeah, it's great. And Kurt Cobain's a legend, isn't he? So.
Absolutely. Oh, yeah. Well, you were saying as well that just before this, which I thought was interesting, about people that write songs being poets, but that you're a lyricist as well. So part of what you do is to write lyrics for songs. So obviously you're crossing the border between poet and lyricist, which I would agree they're two similar things.
Yeah.
But you were saying that actually you think the process of writing a song compared to writing a poem, they're very different things. So how does that sort of work?
Because I think the stimulus for writing a song tends for me to be the tune, whatever that tune might be, or a combination of chords, whatever. That tends to be the start of the process for me. Whereas with poetry, it will be a subject that is the stimulus, and then I'll write it. So if I put a few chords together and then that triggers, the first line of this is going to be "and he said," or whatever it might be, then that's where the writing process starts. But I might have played those chords over and over and over and over again before I got to the point of actually writing lyrics. Whereas with a poetry, so generally the process for me with poetry is it tends to be about 9:30, 10 o'clock in the evening. I've processed everything that's gone around in my head all through the day and perhaps a few days before, and then suddenly it's like there's a knock on the door in my head that goes, right, ready to come out, and then suddenly all of these words come out in a particular order, and they tend to be in a story format, so there'll be a beginning and a middle and end to it. There'll be a definite end to each poem, but that wouldn't happen unless I'd processed it properly all the way. It could be over a few days, or it could be a couple of weeks, or sometimes it could be an instant thing where it all just kind of comes out.
Just comes out at once, yeah. So, as you're saying, the driving force behind the poetry is that subject matter, even though it's something that's maybe you've been mulling over for a while, and that's what's leading it. So, I guess if with the music you're led by the song or the tune, then presumably the beat of the poem is the strongest element.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that's interesting. So, there was a poem that I wrote very recently, which I read at one of the recent Scribal Gathering nights. Yeah. And it was literally about a walk I'd gone on, and the pace and the rhythm of that poem was almost, I could walk the rhythm, if that makes sense. It was the pace that I was walking at. Yeah. So that's really interesting. Not always the case, but sometimes that happens. If you're so connected to what you're saying and where it's come from, that sometimes the rhythm comes from what you were doing. Does that make sense?
No, that does make sense. Yeah, I've never thought about that before actually, but I can completely see what you mean. Because of course, when you listen to a song, you end up naturally walking to the pace of the song. Or, I mean, I do. It's like a sort of John Travolta moment. Yeah. But I suppose, on the flip side of that, if the subject matter is associated with you doing a particular thing, then that might lead to the tone of the poem or the beat of the poem.
I think it definitely does, and also the emotion behind the poem. So if you're angry, then that will come through in the pace of the poem as well. Or if you're feeling a little bit melancholy or whatever it might be, or happy or whatever, that will inform the pace of the poem. Yeah. Whether you could read the same poem at a different pace, you probably could. But you wouldn't, because it wouldn't make sense. But it'd be interesting for me to read a poem that's supposed to be read in an angry way, in a softer. Yeah, I don't
to see how it changes it,
Yeah.
or whether it just comes out wrong. You know, whether
yeah.
it just doesn't work anymore. Yeah, that would be a good experiment. And you mentioned just now that you know, the end of your day is you potentially writing a poem, and that might be every few days or every couple of weeks. And I actually did a small mathematical sum earlier on today, because you told me that since 2019 you've written over 200 poems.
Yeah, I think 281 poems since the weekend. Yeah, the weekend was last time I wrote something. Yeah.
Gosh.
Yeah.
Okay.
So has that messed up your calculations?
It has somewhat. You've added 81,
Yeah.
I believe. But that's okay. Because actually that makes it even more shocking. So I did 365 times 2, which is the 2 years, divided by 200.
Yeah.
So we have one poem every 3.6 days.
Yeah.
That's quite a lot.
It is, and and you don't realise how much that is until you reach a point where you can't write anymore. If you get, you know, what everyone refers to as writer's block. So I think in around August time this year, I had really struggled to write anything. I was in the final two or 3 months of being barred, and I literally reached a point where I couldn't write anything. Whereas 2 or 3 months before that, in April, I was looking over it today actually, I wrote a poem pretty much every day, and they were all poems that weren't just kind of, you know, 5 or 6 lines or whatever. They were long sort of what I'd call it sort of epic, because they're long, not because they're epic. Epic poems, and so I don't know where that comes from, but that just shows you, you know, how creative the brain can be. Not necessarily my brain, but just how creative the brain can be under the right circumstances, the right things going on.
And the idea as well that, you know, you came to this later on, and you've written so much. Did you have a sense of there being a lot of stuff to kind of come out?
Yeah, no, I think so. Yeah, I've thought a lot about it actually. I think that I think everyone does. I think everyone does. Everyone thinks thoughts, don't they? Obviously, and they mull things over. And different people have different ways of getting rid of that stuff. Some people exercise. I'll talk about that in a little while, but some people exercise. They do all sorts of things. It might be creative stuff. It might be just kind of, they just like getting involved in solving challenges or whatever it might be. And I think for me, the poetry is the thing that helps me get stuff out, clears my head. So I don't know what I did for the last 40 years before I started doing it. No. But there is a feeling of relief sometimes when you get some of those poems out, that it kind of, once it's out, it kind of it doesn't resolve an issue or problem, but it kind of, I don't know how you'd explain it, but it just gets it out.
I know what you mean. It's so I used to journal a bit, and what I found was that when it was on paper, it wasn't just in my head. I'd created a separation between the thought that was in my head and, you know, it being a physical object that I could, you know, put away somewhere. Yeah. Maybe it's something to do with
something to that. There's also an element of that, the kind of creative side of your brain, or whatever, you know, whatever it is that creates those words, is like a muscle. So when you start using it and then become accustomed to using it more regularly, that the muscle gets stronger, and so you become more able to kind of churn things out more readily. Yeah. Whereas, you know, if I remember back to when I first started doing the bard work, it would, you know, I certainly wasn't churning things out on a daily basis, but I noticed it was getting, I was more able to kind of generate stuff. But interesting, I was talking to a friend recently. I stopped exercising at the very beginning of the pandemic. I was supposed to have done the London Marathon. Oh. I did kind of do a big long run, but it wasn't the London Marathon. Yeah. And then I decided, that's it, I'm not doing any more exercise. But that was the point at which I started creating a lot more writing and poetry. Ah, that's interesting. In August, when I was having my writer's block, I decided I was going to start exercising again. And that's when my writing stopped. Ah. And I don't know whether there's a connection between, if you're doing one thing, the other thing can't happen or not. I'd love to know if there's a scientific reason for that.
It sounds like energy that you're just driving into different places.
Different places, exactly. Yeah. So maybe not exercising is really good for creative people.
No, I like that. I'm sure many people will like that. Yeah. This is the excuse, I'm creative, I can't exercise. No, that's good.
So if anyone's listening and they know whether there's actually any evidence to support what I'm saying, that'd be really good to know.
And so in those moments of writer's block, because you talk about, you know, a muscle and you have to exercise the muscle and a muscle memory kind of thing. So, you know, if I feel like I can't create something, the temptation is to stop. But many people I've spoken to have said, no, you have to go through it. Even if you produce a lot of rubbish stuff and you feel really bad about it, you will get through it. And the trick is to get through it, like running through a stitch, I suppose. So what's your approach?
I think it is exactly as you described. So I've got my phone on my lap, and I use the notes on my phone to kind of work things out. And if I just scroll through, there are another 100 or so poems on there that are unfinished, that I would consider that's rubbish. I'm never going to show anyone that.
Yeah.
Or it's just not. It isn't finished. So sometimes I do go over some of those ones that I didn't get through, and then I might go back and go, oh, I was onto something there, and then I'll come back to it and then complete it. And sometimes it works out. Other times it just stays on there. and I should delete it because it's probably really embarrassing.
I think everybody has a notes of shame, do they not? I hope, anyway.
You're right, though. That's you've got to just keep going, keep doing it. You don't have to. That's the other thing. I sort of think. I don't think anyone should put themselves under any pressure to do anything. But I think that just keep going, and see what happens. If you don't write anything, you don't get anything, right? So
that's very true. So. Yeah, that is very true. Can't make a cake without cracking a few eggs, as they say.
Yeah.
And on that note, shall we have another song? Which one's this?
Which one are we on now? I think we're on. Are we on Bob Dylan? Yeah, the Subterranean Homesick Blues. Brilliant tune.
Okay, so that was Subterranean Homesick Blues by Bob Dylan, who...
Cool tune.
Very good tune. He's known as a poet as much as a musician, almost, isn't he, really?
He's
that's
a bit of a genius, really, isn't he?
Yeah.
Well, he is a genius.
No, indeed, he is. Okay, so you mentioned that you're kind of an introverted extrovert.
Yeah. And
that, to me, is actually the perfect kind of description for a poet-performer, because obviously poetry's introspective, performing is more extroverted. And your poetry kind of started by being the Bard of Buckingham, so you had to do both from the beginning, really.
Yeah.
Do you enjoy both in equal measure? Did one come more naturally than the other?
I think that I'm possibly have more experience of performing than writing.
Okay.
Definitely. So, and I did a degree in drama and theatre studies, and I was in a band when I was younger, so I was singing, in front of audiences and things like that. There's a difference though when you've got no musicians behind you. I think we talked about this recently. You've got no musicians behind you to kind of give you that support, make you feel like you're part of a team or something, which there's strength in numbers sort of thing.
Yeah.
And there's nothing to kind of guide you. So it is literally your voice and your words. And so you're really putting yourself out there in lots of different ways. You're quite vulnerable in some respects. And I tend to do things that I probably shouldn't do, as in, I don't think I'm a natural performer, but there's something inside me that makes me feel like I should definitely put myself out there and put myself on the stage and do stuff. Even though saying it's painful is possibly the wrong word, but it can be painful. Performing can be quite a painful experience.
Yeah. Oh, it can.
Because unless you completely relax into it and forget that everything's there, you're constantly aware that you're exposing yourself. In the kind of oral way, you're exposing yourself and your thoughts and things to strangers more often than not.
Yeah.
And what does that mean? Does that mean they're going to think that everything you're saying is an indication of who you are as a person, and is that going to impact on whether they like you or not? So, it's tricky.
I can feel the internal dialogue, and
it's just a bit like a counselling session, isn't it? Telling you all my dark secrets now.
No, I can relate to it actually, and also have this idea of you should get up, you should perform.
Yeah.
But I can't say that there must be something in me that wants to at the same time, because there are, truly introverted people that wouldn't have the thought or wouldn't feel like they should or they have to.
And maybe it's a bit like when you do it once and it's a good experience and you get a nice response, that feeling is far better and more worthwhile than the process of getting there, if that makes sense. So whether it is the applause at the end or the recognition at the end that drives me on to do that, I don't know. I don't know if it is that or not. I don't know. I really don't know. But I know that it's not something I always feel comfortable doing.
No.
I think people always assume that if you stand up in front of a crowd and deliver something or perform something, that you must be really, really confident and that, you know, that you really want to show off or something like that. But it isn't. It isn't about that. It's about. I don't know what it is. I haven't really been able to put my finger on it. But I think some people would describe that they're kind of compelled to do it. So I guess that must be what it is.
Yeah, I think perhaps it is a sort of compulsion. And as you say, often, or hopefully often, the poetry discusses topics that everybody can relate to.
Yeah.
So, you know, when you're up there performing, I mean, you're kind of hopefully speaking for other people that perhaps can't get up and perform. So in that sense, and especially with relation to poetry, I suppose it's not so much sort of showing off, but it's more like a desire to create connection. Because
I think that's it. Yeah.
It's a performance, but it's not a glitzy performance, is it? In that way, poetry generally.
No, because if you wanted it to be something that was, you know, really going to get people going, you'd choose something that really got people.
Yeah,
going.
You cartwheel or something.
Exactly, but then, if you could. But there's, poetry attracts a particular audience. I always saw it as my role as bard to make poetry more attractive to an audience that perhaps didn't exist before. So bringing people in that perhaps wouldn't have ever considered either reading or listening. And there is kind of a perception of poets and poetry that perhaps doesn't fit with everybody's idea of what entertainment is and that sort of thing. So yes, it's interesting.
There is, but I feel it's having a bit of a revival because you've got spoken word, and that was never a title that I knew particularly well. It was always poetry, poet, but spoken word, it's I
think of it as something that's really cool. Yeah. And certainly since I started doing this stuff, the people you meet are really cool, and there's such a wide variety of amazing talent, and they all come to it from different perspectives, with different styles, different voices, different backgrounds and things, which makes when you go and see a night of various different spoken word artists, you're guaranteed to get a really diverse experience, which is great.
Yeah.
So even as a performer, I actually enjoy being there in the room with all those people as much as being on stage and performing to an audience, if that makes sense.
No, it does. Just watching is sort of part of the joy, isn't it?
Yeah, and you learn loads of stuff as well. I mean, last week when we were at Scribal Gathering, there's a couple of artists and you think, God, that's exactly how I want to do it. They were really good.
Yeah. Because I guess you're picking up on, well, you can observe their performance styles, and it's nice to take away from that, you know, do they spread out a lot on the stage? Do they sort of make themselves big in that way? Do I like the way they rhyme? There's so many different things to pick up on. Yeah,
I think the key thing with it is that it's really easy to spot somebody who isn't being authentic with it, so you have to find your own voice in it, and you have to be yourself, and you have to be authentic when you do it. But that doesn't mean you can't kind of make more of it and kind of...
Yeah.
And somebody said a couple of months ago when I was talking about this, that you always think that you're overdoing it, but actually you can never overdo it, so actually you should really overdo it.
Ham it up a bit.
Yeah. A bit. Without,
No, I know what you mean. It's sort of your genuine self, but in a bigger way, I guess.
Yeah.
And why do you think poetry is having a revival? Have you thought about why that might be? Do you have any theories?
I think one thing is that you don't have to go to a venue to perform as much as you did, because with the pandemic, lots of things went online. So it means that people are able to express themselves on a variety of different platforms. And sometimes performing in front of an audience is a scary experience, whereas perhaps speaking to a group of people on Facebook Live or something like that is less scary because you're in your own room and you can't really see or feel the audience.
Yeah.
And so it makes it more accessible to people that perhaps wouldn't have done it before. That's talking about the kind of the online side of it. I think that there's lots of things to talk about at the moment. There's so many things going on in the world that we can either be happy about, but more often than not we can have a gripe with, and we want to have a say in what's going on and make it known that we're not happy about it. Yeah. And that we want to change it, and why and question why are things like this, and also why am I the way I am, you know, and in sort of all of that exploration, all of that is going to resonate in some way with someone, one way or another.
They say art comes from misery, don't they?
I think there's something.
I wouldn't like to say that we're in a miserable time, but there has been a challenging time. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah, I think there's something in that, isn't there? And certainly people who feel that they're not getting a fair deal, want to express that, and sometimes there's no other way to communicate that. I mean, people protest and if we look at last year in the big protest, and there were loads of different protests. There were all different sort of themes and things. And sometimes that can turn to violence, and I think you can be violent without being violent, if that makes sense. So you can use your voice to be violent, if that makes sense.
I agree.
And in some ways, that has a bigger impact than going smashing a window.
No, it does. Yeah. It does. Because I suppose, where people can go and smash windows, one person's window smash is the same as another person's, whereas one person's poem is different, and there's power in that.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. And I mean, I've always thought that the thing with the internet is it makes everybody a spokesperson. Everybody has the opportunity to voice their opinions.
Yeah.
And obviously poetry, on the face of it, it's people voicing their opinions, but it's done obviously in a creative, non-confrontational sort of fashion.
Yeah, I think so. Although, I've seen some poets, and there's some poets locally who are very confrontational, and they're right to be really angry about the things that are going on around them. But it's still entertainment. There's something about that combination of it being entertainment. They could be really angry and talk about something really serious, but still make you laugh out loud. And there's something about that that's really powerful.
Yeah, I can see exactly what you mean.
I haven't quite conquered that yet. I'm not quite there yet with that. But that's where I'd like to get to with this sort of stuff, is tapping into subjects where you can be really powerful but entertaining at the same time. Maybe I have. We'll see.
I think you have. No, but I'd like to talk more about this, because next up I'm going to ask you about your poetry themes. But firstly, let's have another song. What's this one?
I think we're going to listen to a song that I wrote with a friend of mine called Pete Thirlby, and it's called "Lead Me to Your Open Sea."
See the vapor in your eyes, clouds more heavy in your skies, rain upon your mountainside, valley streams will soon collide. I wanna see the light through the eyes of those lies that are gone. I wanna hear the tales about the men who set sail and sailed on. Now they're gone, all gone. Tell me where your river ends, where your waterfall descends, when your winter frost sets in, when your great descent begins. I wanna see the light through the eyes of those lives that are gone. I wanna hear the tales about the men who set sail and sailed on. And sailed on. Now they're gone. All gone. Will
Okay, thank you very much for sharing that song, which is your song.
It is. Yeah, mine and Pete's, yeah.
Yeah, no, I enjoyed that. It's the kind of song that you'd want to play in the car on a journey. It's one of the nice driving songs.
Nailed it. Yeah.
So we were just talking about the themes of your poems.
Yeah.
And you were saying that you would quite like them to be slightly more, not angry, that's not the right word, but another one's not coming to mind, but sort of more...
confrontational, I suppose.
Confrontational, yeah.
I think that the people that I've seen and heard who are really good at it have a lived experience which it makes sense that they're angry, and I think sometimes it's difficult. I think that I live quite a privileged life. I've got everything that I want, and I can get most of the things that I want from life, and so then it's difficult to be angry, isn't it? To be and I'm not saying that because some people are like, oh blimey, he's got everything he wants or whatever, but I think that it has to be authentic when you're angry and you're being confrontational.
Yeah. And
there are definitely things that I can be confrontational and angry about, but I don't know if I'm angry enough about them to be able to articulate them in the way that other people do. Does that make sense?
No, it does make sense.
But there's a part of me, and it's weird. It's a weird envy, but there's a part of me that's envious of people that have that lived experience and that can then be able to create stuff that comes from that place, because I am quite tapped into it. But maybe that's just because I'm lucky. I don't know.
I know what you mean.
Does that make sense?
No, it does make sense, and it's interesting. I think, people live within the climate that they're in their sort of immediate environment, and we can feel bad for moaning about it because on the big spectrum we're very lucky. But at the end of the day, you can't live anybody else's life.
No, exactly.
So if you feel various frustrations within your own, I mean, it's hard not to want to write about that.
That's true, and I think what I do instead is I try as hard as I can to look into a subject and really understand the situation that people are in, and then speak on other people's behalf and speak on behalf of their misery, whatever it is. Yeah. That's a way of tapping into it. But otherwise, if you're talking about it and you haven't really lived it, I think you can come across as a bit fake, and people go, you don't know what you're talking about.
No, absolutely.
And they'd be absolutely right, I don't. So I try and steer away from trying to be that until I found a subject that I can be genuinely visceral and, confrontational about. Although,
So because that sort of emotion doesn't spring up a lot of the time, because we, as you're saying, we don't have a lot to be really cross about, therefore you haven't got that many sort of confrontational poems as a result, I suppose.
I suppose so. And I think, there's also a part, especially with the bard role, where you don't want to be the person that's always talking about sort of really dull and negative things. Although, I could say that a good proportion of mine have tapped into emotions at the time where I've been a bit down in the dumps or whatever, and I've written about those kind of times.
Yeah.
But you feel a responsibility to try and find subjects that are more sort of uplifting, which is why I think I kind of gravitated towards the nature stuff, because nature's amazing. Like, there's so many great things you can talk about just by looking out your window and seeing different seasons, or the dragonfly, or the river, or the tree, or whatever it might be, or the blade of grass, that you can think, that's amazing, that is actually really uplifting, and it's a really good reason to want to go for a walk and get up in the morning and all that sort of stuff. So I think that's why I've tapped into that stuff, the nature stuff, perhaps more than other stuff, and why I also gravitate towards what I describe as sort of children's poetry. But I definitely, there are lots of things I could write about, in relation to politics, where I can be angry, but then again you have to think about your audience and I always try and think, I don't want to alienate people as well, so you try and be a kind poet.
That's a nice slogan, the kind poet. I know what you mean about the politics there, and it is difficult because, increasingly sometimes it feels like people are more divided politically. Yeah. And with your role as a bard, as you've said, you've got responsibility for everyone's voice, haven't you?
Yeah, and I think I came to the role very soon after after sort of Brexit and after the elections, and there was lots of stuff to talk about there. But equally, there was also, I got a sense that people didn't want to talk about it anymore, and they wanted just to get on with people. Yeah. So it was trying to strike that balance, really. Whether I did or not, I don't know.
So do you think you can use nature as a symbol, again with the dragonfly was a sort of symbol of resilience, for example?
Yeah, you can use it as a kind of a way of explaining society in some ways. You can, that definitely is. Dragonfly is all about predator and prey, and feeling the dragonfly always feeling like he's being chased, and she is being chased and is always the prey, and there's always somebody after you. And funny enough, a lot of my children's programs are there's that dynamic to it. There's the vulnerable character, and then the one that's trying to get the vulnerable character, and in the end the vulnerable character wins, and
Oh, that's great. Yeah, stories like that work really well, don't they? It's like an underdog story.
Yeah, exactly.
Which appeals to a lot of people.
Mm.
And the other themes that I've got here are so science, nature, politics, and people.
Mm.
So how does the science, nature, people dynamic work? And politics as well. Which is the most important? That's such a ridiculous question, really.
Question.
But I thought I'd throw it at you.
So I wrote a poem called The Scientist, and that was trying to encompass everything and trying to do exactly what answer the question that you've just asked.
Yeah.
Whether I achieved it or not, I don't know. It's really long, that one. I think if you were asking me which one's the most important to me, I think that I can't really answer that. I think they're all equally important, but and I enjoy the process of writing each one of those. It's whatever triggers my imagination, and anything that I'm sort of really passionate about. I wouldn't write it unless I cared about it. So I think they're all important.
No.
But if you looked at it, there's as many political poems as there are nature poems, as there are kids poems. So there's a real balance there.
Yeah. That's fair enough. They all tap into sort of fundamental
It's a very
things,
diplomatic answer, isn't it?
No, I think it's the right answer, really, because I don't think there is, one that rises above the others. But I just thought I'd pose that to you.
Yeah.
Okay, should we have another song?
Which one are we doing now?
We are doing...
Oh, we're going to do our OK Computer, Subterranean Homesick Alien, which is an awesome tune.
Okay, so we are coming towards the end of what's been a really wonderful show with Dean Jones, Bard of Buckingham.
One was Bard of Buckingham.
Sorry. But still, a wonderful poet. Thank you so much for joining us.
That's all right. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. No, it's been great. And when can people catch one of your next performances if they'd like to come along?
So I'm doing an online slam. It's called Ubi Hive, and it's run by some brilliant poets, like Clive and Nick, and I did a slam a couple of months ago and got into the final. So this is the final, and it's an online thing. And if you want to find out about it, you can follow me on Facebook and Instagram and something else, Twitter, and I'll mention how you can sign up and watch it.
Okay.
It'll be early December, so it should be good. Not only will you get to hear me, you'll get to hear some amazing poets. They really, really are good. The standard is really cool, and it's a national competition. So. Oh wow! So poets from all over the country.
That sounds great. Best of luck with that.
Thank you very much.
And you're going to read us another poem, aren't you?
Yeah. So this is a poem called A Path Between Two Trees, and I've talked all the way through this about the experience during the pandemic and writing stuff as I've been out on my hour-long walks or whatever. Well, this was a longer walk. This was a 3.5-hour walk, I think. And this weekend, I went off with my mates to remember a friend who passed away 8 years ago. And this poem incorporates some of my memories of my friend as well, so it's quite an important poem to me, and sort of talks a bit about that experience. It's not a dark poem. It's a nice poem, but just to give you a bit of insight before I go into it.
Thank you.
So it's A Path Between Two Trees. Those days when being inside drives everyone insane. I can be irritable and irritating. I needed space to reset and start again. I pulled on my dark green wellies, put 2 ales inside an old rucksack, wore my best brand new black hoodie. It'll be a while before I'm back. Bye, kids. Are you sure you won't come? Fine. See you soon. Slam. Closed the door behind me, and I was gone all afternoon. I walked beneath the ring road, past charcoal, ash and burned out wood, an old can of Lynx deodorant the worker views up to no good. They tried to blow up a can of deodorant, a small explosion beneath the road. Could have caused an accident, but I don't think it did explode. I remembered back to when I was young, throwing batteries on a fire, until one actually did explode. Such a strange desire to actually want to damage things, to break things and vandalise. Perhaps I'm just getting older, or just disappointed, but not surprised. Over the bridge and around the corner, across the wiry, muddy, trampled fence, towards brown fields, ploughed and ready, fields' seeds explode with spring suspense. These fields which grow in cycles, producing crops we actually eat, generating simple sustenance from hectares of golden corn or wheat. It's been weeks since I walked anywhere. Today I walked solitarily and all alone. That meant I could venture further without that reluctant undertone. Dad, can we go home now? Dad, I think I need a wee. Dad, I'm really thirsty. Dad. And then I remembered it was just me. It felt like spring was finally here, the springtime's birdsong very loud, the red kite hovering high above, each field now freshly ploughed. It swooped down upon the broken earth, claws clasped prey and sweep back up again, caught a mouse or another tiny rodent hovering overhead every now and then. Sometimes it's like nature knows I'm there and puts on its best display. A white egret glides in front of me like a graceful bird of prey. Its white feathers hang below its chest like a waterfall from its beak, and I often wonder what these birds would say if they had the skills to speak. A white house beyond the hedge, beyond the fence, beyond the field, a perfect springtime work of art, scenes only weekend walks reveal. At this point I would normally turn around and head back home, but something dragged me forward, and on and on and on I roamed. I love our country's public footpaths, and despite us all being stuck inside, hardly anyone was out there using them. These walks the perfect place to hide. For 3 hours I felt invisible, not a soul in sight to see, one foot in front of the other, content to be in my own company. My brain drifts off quite regularly when views around me don't distract. I reached a field and climbed the stile, sat down with speckled hen unpacked. Sky, white and grey with cotton clouds, no sun or clear skies to be seen. I gulped another mouth of amber ale and looked far beyond the green. In front of me, a dry and muddy path led my gaze right through 2 trees. There has to be a poem there, I thought, the second day of spring's warm breeze. I took a photo of the path and trees and packed away my empty bottle, breathed sharply in and then stood up and continued walking at full throttle. I walked between the path's 2 trees across the field towards the town, entering Western Avenue along the road which takes you down, left to the old town centre or right towards neighbouring Brackley. I decided I'd end the walk and see my mate Norm in the cemetery. I sat amongst the gravestones. It's peaceful where he rests. His neighbour stone has words inscribed which summed up my old mate's life the best. Not how did he die, but how did he live? Not what did he gain, but what did he give? Was he ever ready with a word of good cheer, to bring back a smile, to banish a tear? Not what did the sketch in the newspapers say, how many were sorry when he passed away? These are the things that measure the worth of a man as a man regardless of birth. I stood up and took a photograph of these words upon the stone inscribed, thought a lot as I went home about when I go how I might be described. I'm glad I took that walk outside between the path between 2 trees and sat there with my second bottle, contemplating those who rest in cemeteries. I stepped in through the front door, my supper warm and ready in a pan, less irritable and irritating, a calm, refreshed and happier man.
Thank you very much. And we're going to play out on this final song, which is...
It's Thunderstruck by AC/DC, because it'll just lift your spirits a little bit after that poem.